Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lorensson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
So, Tom, we are here and we're going to continue our conversation today on the ABCs of thriving. This fantastic series that we're doing. And we are on the letter E. So I'm going to hand over to you. Do you want to introduce what we're going to be talking about today? It's a fascinating topic. It's widely misunderstood by people. So I think this is going to be a very helpful episode. Kick us off.
Okay. Energize Empathy. And that's what we're talking about is empathy, not sympathy. And distinguishing between sympathy and empathy is really important, especially because for the most part, the general understanding of those two words is not accurate.
Yeah. And I think that's fair to say. And even just, I feel like you've shared this with me before. And even before this conversation started, I still didn't have a clue what I was talking about. And I think it's just indicative of what's out there in the world. It's fuzzy language. We don't really know what's what. We don't know what distinguishes one from the other. We've got some vague understanding. My understanding is that, sympathy is, you get sympathy cards, right? And you're wanting to care for people that are going through something, but we don't really, how do we know the difference between sympathy and empathy, and why does that even matter? I think this is the content of what we're shooting for today. So why don't you give us some clarity?
Okay. Just to backtrack into a little bit of our conversation before this conversation, where we're inviting the listeners to join in with us, is the difference, and I mentioned this to you, between with and in. With and in. And if you reflect back on when I posed that to you, what was your response?
Well, I was saying, I think that you said there's two different words, with and in, what comes to mind. And for me, with was all about walking alongside someone, or there was a connection with someone, but it wasn't, it had a different boundary to in. That was it was like another step. I think it felt like into something feels like a different space than with. Is that what you wanted to me to share?
Yep. Because with and in are critically important where it comes to sympathy and empathy. Just as we would think of with as different than in or into, sympathy and empathy are two very different things, but they have one thing very much in common, and that's emotions. The PATH is the word for emotions, feelings.
Pathy.
Yes. Empath.
Empath, yeah.
Which is interesting because there isn't such a thing as a sympath, which is the result of not really understanding and just melding the two together. So sympathy, the PATH, is feelings, emotions. The sim means with. So that prefix means with. So sympathy means I am feeling with your feelings. I'm resonating that way. Sympathy, with feelings. Empathy, the EM, means into or in. So with sympathy, I'm feeling emotionally what you are feeling. We are feeling that together. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So I'm, for example, I don't know, like had an argument with my kids and I'm all upset, and then suddenly you're upset too about the situation. Yep. So suddenly we're in the same, it's the same emotions we're feeling. That would be sympathy.
Emotionally resonating with one another. Resonating with. A sympathy card. You mentioned sympathy cards. That's an expression to someone else. I feel your pain. I'm feeling with you in your loss. And there are times where that's really beneficial. It's very important that somebody knows and resonates, and I'm not alone in these feelings. Hence, sympathy cards, and why sympathy can be so important. Sympathy is often thought of with pity and feeling sorry for. Like, I pity you. I feel your pain. It gets really muddy because sympathy in and of itself is just feeling with somebody else. That may be sorrow. That could be joy. It's
connecting to someone else's emotion.
Yes, and feeling what they are feeling.
Yes.
And sharing that feeling with.
And so before we get into empathy, which I think is really helpful, I think my observations, Tom, and I might be wrong, but my observations on sympathy is that actually potentially it's overvalued. It's like potentially it has a place. We know it has a place.
Yes.
But it's seen as like unless you're feeling the emotion with someone, it's like it's not quite enough compassion or something, you know? But as we're going to talk about in just a sec, actually there are some downsides to sympathy, and it's not always appropriate to feel with people.
And not beneficial.
And then there's this alternative that potentially is this incredible gift to the loved one, to the person that you want to be helping. But it is very different. There's a distinction there that really is a marked distinction that's different, that allows you to be in a different space to them, but still hold compassion into their situation.
Yep. So, and just to underscore how convoluted and confused the general usage of empathy and sympathy is, that they're frequently used as synonyms, mean the same thing. Oftentimes, they're actually reversed in meanings.
So that people are actually using them in different ways. And
they're using it the opposite of what it actually is. So, for example, sympathy is feeling with. So, if you Google search empathy versus sympathy, and there are many search engines, let's just be very careful. Anyway, whatever. So, one of the things that comes up is the difference between empathy and sympathy says empathy involves feeling what someone else feels. No, it doesn't. That's sympathy, because feeling with. While sympathy doesn't, which is like, no, that's just completely inaccurate. Sympathy feels what someone else feels. That's sympathy, feeling with.
Okay.
Empathy, EM, is into. I imagine, I have a sense of what you are feeling.
But you're not actually feeling it.
But I'm not feeling it. I don't have to feel it. And frequently, it's really important and valuable for me not to feel what you are feeling. One, they're your emotions. For me to take that from you? No.
And this is where I think, I think it's helpful, because I think sometimes we can put sympathy on this pedestal of like the ultimate, connectivity with a friend, or is if actually you feel what they're feeling. And it isn't always actually beneficial. there's like you say, number one, you're taking something from, potentially you're taking the spotlight away from them being able to grieve or laugh or whatever it is.
Yes.
And it might be, not all the time, but it might be, the context might be incredibly important for that person to fully experience that for themselves.
Yes.
Number one. And then we also talked about just some of the different contexts where, and I think this is helpful, Tom, because I think it'll help our listeners get their heads around this, but some of the different contexts where sympathy is not helpful, like you explained, therapists know this, right? So
hopefully, but often don't.
But therapists are really, it's unwise to sympathize. As you don't want a therapist, or as a client, you don't want a therapist that's feeling your emotions with you. You want a therapist that can imagine and empathize and
it matters too, and
absolutely, and there's compassion and all the rest of it. But
it's still, not about them.
Their brain is still in therapy land.
Yes.
And they're not all emotional like the emotions that you're bringing to the table at that point. And so that's where it gets very... And I think one of the things you said to me earlier was if we don't have the discernment of understanding the roles that we're playing in relationships and the context, and there is space for sympathy, but if we don't understand when those things should take place, then actually we end up with really muddy we can muddy the waters on relationships and actually are not allow the person that we obviously want, the person that is going through whatever they're going through, they don't get the full beneficial impact of our friendship or our relationship with them if we cannot figure out whether this is appropriate or not. Is that right?
Yes. Another entry in empathy versus sympathy, both sympathy and empathy have roots in the Greek term pathos, but then it says meaning suffering, feeling. No, it doesn't. Pathos is feeling. P-A-T-H are feelings. They are emotions. Frequently, with pathos, that involves suffering, but it's not limited to that, which is why sympathy is frequently cast in terms of pity and negative emotions and sadness and death and things like that. It just means to feel with. You're feeling things, I'm feeling the same way.
Okay, so give us some examples of where sympathy feels appropriate and beneficial. Like, what would that look like when in those instances?
You've had a death. I've had a death. It's a death
shared
that
death.
We share. Absolutely. Because then you're not alone in it. I'm not alone in it. It's a shared loss. Where that wouldn't be appropriate is where it's yours.
Then you have empathy for me.
Yes. Because I then am in a place with boundaries, because that's what the distinction really importantly involves, is a healthy boundary. Your experience, your feelings, your emotions are yours. It doesn't mean they don't matter to me and are not significant to me. And it doesn't mean I don't have my own emotions about that. But they're not your emotions. I'm not taking them on. Because taking them on can be taking them from.
And yet people can think that that's a good thing.
Sure.
But actually, potentially, that's taking them from someone, which doesn't allow them to journey through them themselves as fully as they could.
Yes. And it's not as though with sympathy or empathy that the emotions don't matter or they do matter. It's how they matter. That's what's critically important. The analogy I used was with a lifeguard and someone drowning. It would not be helpful for the lifeguard to sympathize with the panic and distress of the person who's drowning. Don't sympathize. Empathize with it. Absolutely. Care. It matters. I'm aware of. I understand. Absolutely. But as the lifeguard, I'm not going to panic with you. I'm not going to feel that with you. I'm not going to feel sorry for you. No. I'm going to help you. I'm going to be there for you. I'll help you move from that place to a different emotional place, which is feeling the relief of being on dry land, and you can breathe, and you're not trying to breathe underwater, and all of that. Does that make sense?
Totally. And so there is something about safeguarding that, like, I think that, I mean, that's such a helpful picture, because it's like, actually, the thing about the lifeguard in that situation is that they actually have a role to play. They have a job to do, right? They're not just like a general human being on the side of the pool. So, but, you know, it might not be that we're a lifeguard, but it could be that we're a parent or like a spouse or a friend. And so
with someone who is in distress.
And so we have all of these roles. So understanding that we have a role to play, I think, is part of this, isn't it?
Absolutely. And clarity in the boundaries.
And understanding that, like, sympathy isn't going to always help you be that role. No. It's like being the lifeguard that's panicked. Yeah. We don't want to be the lifeguards that's panicked. We want to be the friend that is not so overcome with emotion that we can't actually be there to help, unless it is a genuine sympathy situation like you just described, where we're a group of friends, we've all lost someone. Then you know, that's a whole other
sympathize
game.
And sympathize and sympathize.
Yes,
because that's beneficial. That's a shared experience. That's a shared emotional connection. Absolutely. Or celebrating. Sympathy. And it's so weird, not all about suffering.
You don't think of it like that, because we do, like, it's like the sympathy card is for funerals or something like that, you know.
It's just so feeling bizarre. With. So when I'm celebrating with somebody and we're celebrating something that we share in common, I'm sympathizing. I'm feeling with. Absolutely.
So that's interesting too, Tom, because
it broadens our emotional experience.
So again, it's like the difference between me getting a first in my MBA.
Yeah.
Right? That is my achievement. And you will empathize with that and absolutely feel you will feel your own feelings about that. But the feelings actually are mine to be enjoyed, and you can support that and all the rest of it.
The accomplishment.
But you wouldn't go around feeling the same thing as I would in that situation. However, if, like, for example, this podcast won an award, then we would both feel, we would have the sympathy together of like, oh my gosh, we did this together.
Yes.
Because it was a shared accomplishment. So that's the difference.
Yes. Another example would be a parent with their child at a sport event, and the child is the athlete. What's the caricature of the insane parent who just goes...
I mean, it's the classic,
Go ahead.
Well, it's just the parents who... I know, like, a tennis coach of high school tennis players, and they said that notoriously, like, you know, they're having to deal with the parents.
Yes.
Like, it's a classic known thing, because actually the parents
are sympathizing.
They're also taking the experience away from the child, and suddenly they're living out their lives, their hope of what they wanted.
Yes.
And they've become... probably not consciously, but they've become the center of attention.
Yes,
and the child actually isn't in that space, and so that's another example where sympathy is not good in that
that's
context.
Not beneficial.
It's not helpful for the children. It's not helpful for the coach.
Right. So that would be another example of where the person, in this case a parent with their athlete child, is sympathizing. Not helpful. And actually, not only not helpful, problematic. And that's, again, an example of the boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And the lack of that, or the clarity of that. That doesn't mean that the parent couldn't empathize. They can. They can appreciate what their child is experiencing and feel into that,
Mm-hmm.
have a sense of that emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
and can be supportive, encouraging, celebrating with, or lamenting, but it stays the other person's emotion. It's not taken on.
Mm. So just as a bit of an overview of where we've got to, one of the things that we felt like was really important was just to clarify the distinction between the two, and that I think that's really helpful. And they are mixed up, and they're used in different ways, and I don't know, people use empathy when they actually mean sympathy, and vice versa.
Yep.
So I feel like, just understanding the words and what they mean,
Mm-hmm.
the pathy and the empathy and the sympathy,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that this is about feelings and whose feelings are happening.
Yes.
and then the benefits of both.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we've also highlighted is that while there is a place for sympathy, there's also caution there, because I think we can get pulled into something.
Oh,
we
yes.
can end up taking on someone's feelings when we really shouldn't. And it can look like we're being super compassionate. And obviously most people who are doing this aren't doing this on purpose.
No.
But actually, is it beneficial? I think that's a really good question. But then also, and this is where I want us to kind of go into, also this episode is not just to put caution on sympathy or just to kind of define what sympathy and empathy is. It actually is called to energize empathy. Now, why did you choose that word, Tom? Because that's like an interesting word. It's saying not only do we need to understand this, but we need to put energy into this other space, empathy,
Mm-hmm.
where we're not, we have our own feelings, and yet we're able to kind of think into and understand and imagine what someone else is going through, but we maintain a role for a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can actually really be a good friend, or really be a good parent, or really be whatever role we're playing out,
Or
in that
be
space.
a thriving individual.
Mm-hmm.
See, in context, this is about thriving.
Mm-hmm.
And the ABCs of thriving, and the A was accept adversity. And if you, dear listener, if you've not listened to that one, go back and listen to it, because that's the A of thriving. Because accept adversity, surviving or thriving. And when we accept adversity, it sets the stage for us to be able to thrive and not simply survive. And then the believe in beneficence, doing beneficial things and believing in that, committing to that. And then creating contentment, where there's been adversity and there is beneficial activity taking place, we can create contentment. Out of that, we defer to loving. Which is why Energize Empathy and not sympathy is the E. Because adversity, beneficence, contentment, loving, are there emotions connected to all that?
Yep.
Very powerful, strong emotions are at play in all that. When we energize empathy, we create a larger context in which we can thrive. not just the other person thrive and our connection to them, and then we thrive because we're empathizing with someone who would benefit from that, but also because, here's the thing, it allows us to learn and to value empathy with ourselves. So, stay with me on this one. Energize. Okay, I'm a Star Trek nerd. I'm old enough to remember the original Star Trek, and I loved it. There was a tree that I would climb as a child all the way up to the top because it had a certain set of branches way up at the top that were just like Captain Kirk's chair on the Enterprise. And I would pretend that I was Captain Kirk anyway, the transporter room was where you could move and transport. It would break down all the molecules and then reassemble them in a new place. And what would be the command for that to occur was energize. Bring this in. And there's a reason that it was energized, because the word energize means to give energy to make something occur, to cause something to happen. Mm-hmm. And so Energize Empathy allows a transformative experience in a deeply emotional space. And that isn't just empathy with others, it's empathy with ourselves. And all I have to say is the next thing, and I think you'll get it, why that's so important. Because we often engage in, when there are circumstances of adversity, something called self-pity. We sympathize.
With ourselves.
See it?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And we feel very strongly with ourselves. And it's pitiful.
And it's really that's when you just linger in these emotions. You can't get over your anger over a situation, or you can't get over, and you're lying there at night sympathizing with yourself.
Anxiety or anger or depression or stress. Mm-hmm. And we are sympathizing with ourselves. Wow. It's like this emotional echo chamber that we enter into and then we don't leave. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. That's when we are sympathizing with ourselves.
Wow. So it's kind of like when we're feeling sorry for ourselves, basically.
Exactly.
But it doesn't always appear to be as obvious. Because if we said, if I said to myself, Ruth, you're feeling sorry for yourself, then I would snap myself out of it. But it's more subtle than that.
Oh, very much. Mm-hmm. Because we are feeling those emotions, we feel them with ourselves.
And so what we're talking about here is that if we can learn to empathize with ourselves.
Yes.
It changes something.
It does.
Because it's a real experience, because we're not dismissing the emotion.
No, far from it.
But we are empathizing with, of course you will feel that, Ruth. Of course you're going to be angry, Ruth. That's empathy, right? However, you're not just kind of going round in circles, because somehow you're able to create a boundary.
Exactly. See, That's why the boundaries are there. Because that gives us a cognitive and emotional space to enter into that pulls us out of that sympathetic echo chamber.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And really I can acknowledge, yes, I am feeling that. But as I empathize, I acknowledge that I am feeling it. But there's a part of me that says, yes, but I don't have to go there with you. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if you think about it for a moment, I think you can imagine it. If you think about some space that just spins and it you get caught up in it and you're emotionally sympathizing with yourself. because I'm feeling it, and now I reinforce that feeling.
I think, Tom, I find this really fascinating,
Or
actually.
I say stop.
That's the thing. So I think...
And I acknowledge I'm feeling that way, but I don't have to feel it with me.
Mm-hmm. And it's empowering.
I can empathize with me.
It's empowering because it does stop a cycle. And so as you're talking, I am remembering many years ago, I went through quite a lot of health anxiety, and it was the fight and flight cycle, actually. But what would happen is that, I would just, and this went on for a number of years. I would be ultra sensitive to, if I had like a little pimple on my hand, I'd be like touching it and thinking, oh, I hope that's not anything wrong, and blah, blah, blah. And then I would suddenly kind of...
Or I have a headache and I've got brain cancer.
Yeah, or something like that. And then basically I would, within 24 hours, I would pretty much feel convinced, I would have convinced myself that something was wrong because I'm feeling not right. And now I'm fearful and I'm panicked and I'm full of anxiety. And I remember that actually in that space, it's easy to sympathize with yourself. And if you sympathize with yourself, and you are just literally in that kind of echo chamber of fear and anxiety, fight and flight. It's just like this constant thing that just keeps going. And the thing that stopped it for me eventually was when I was able to, and I didn't have language for this at the time, but probably this is what happened. I was able to access empathy for myself. And I was able to say, okay, you are feeling a physical symptom right now, Ruth, and you're feeling high anxiety. And while I appreciate that, history tells me that that's not real.
Yeah.
And so I was able to separate my cognitive from my somatic and my emotions to some level. And it wasn't like a harsh thing, it was an empathetic thing, but it was not allowing that feeling to have complete control. And so I think, does that apply?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's what
another example though would be of a different emotional state, and that is I'm on top of the world, I'm the greatest, nothing can possibly and it's that celebratory, just I'm all that.
And then it's like, okay, Ruth.
Wait a minute.
That's awesome. And I want you to enjoy that. But there's also dishes in the sink right now.
Right. Or I am feeling so much love for someone that it becomes irrational. And that's where, with an individual with themselves, they get into a narcissistic frame, and they are so in love with themselves, and don't sympathize. Empathy. Yes.
So empathy helps us create these healthy boundaries that actually empower us to acknowledge the feeling that we're going through. Be aware of it.
Acknowledge it.
Journey well with it.
It matters.
Yeah.
It's significant.
But not stay in it unhealthy.
Right. So that's why the context and the nature of the relationship and the different roles that we may play at different times in relationships, that's why that helps us to decide, is this a moment where sympathy would be appropriate and beneficial, that would help accept adversity? Because think about it this way. If we get so caught up during a time of adversity with self-pity, what does that do to accepting it? We don't. We don't want to. We're rejecting it. We see it as a threat. Stuff happens. And we can accept the adversity. And then we can believe in beneficence. We can create contentment. And how important empathy can be for a sense of contentment when there is trauma and stress. You mentioned about the therapeutic relationship. Isn't that what a really good therapist does? for someone in a place of stress and need and distress and discontent is to empathize with that person to help them create a sense of contentment. Yes, this is horrible and awful, but...
And it's really not helpful if they ended up sympathizing.
No. No. And then defer to loving and empathize with loving. And whether it's the other person, or it's you with them, or it's yourself and you with you, empathy can help to defer to loving, where sympathy might get all involved in all sorts of emotions that are anything but loving. Mm-hmm. We're seeing that writ large on a world stage where there is an offense that's happening amongst one people with another people, whether that's Russia that's prominent with the Ukrainians, or the Israelis and the Palestinians. People are taking that on as if it's their own. It's not. That's sympathizing. Does it mean that if I empathize with that, all that's happening there doesn't matter to me? It does. It just matters in a different way.
Yeah.
And I don't get caught up in all that. Mm-hmm. Their trauma, their offense isn't my trauma, my offense. So it can stop an escalation like that.
I think so. And there is something very loving. You know, I know this is the type of phrase, and I think this might have come from you, but this is the type of phrase that I feel like I say to myself when I'm going through something and I'm feeling a strong emotion, mm-hmm. whatever emotion that is. I often say, of course you feel like that, Ruth. That's empathy. Of course you feel like that, Ruth. Mm-hmm. However, it doesn't have to determine everything, you know? So it's like there's this self-talk of course I understand myself. Like, that's normal that you would feel like that, but it doesn't have to, it doesn't have to inform all of these other decisions.
Yep.
And I think that that's an incredibly loving thing to do, and a loving way to speak to yourself or mm-hmm. others, you know?
An empathetic way, mm-hmm. rather than a sympathetic way. Mm-hmm. And when we energize the transporter, moving from here to there, when we energize empathy, we allow a transporting, so to speak, from one emotional space to a different emotional space.
So we allow the journey, really. We're mm-hmm. kind of saying, okay, we don't get stuck. Because I wonder whether the sympathy thing, especially with ourselves,
oh, it does.
We get stuck in like I think I liked what you said, the echo chamber of our own feelings. Like we're sympathizing with ourselves. Whereas the energizing empathy is saying, okay, there is a transportation here. Now, we don't know how quick that will be or how long that will be, but there is this journey. This feeling is serving a purpose, and it's mm-hmm. going to go through a journey to get you into a different space.
Yep. And then we don't have to deny the emotions. We can acknowledge them, mm-hmm. name them, be aware of them, just not be compromised by them. And this is all about thriving, the ABCs of thriving. And with accept adversity, believe in beneficence, create contentment, defer to loving. When we energize empathy, there is an emotional connection. It's just a healthy one that has some boundaries and is contextual. And wait for it, with that accept adversity, it may be because somebody hurt somebody else. It may be self-harm. It may be harm that someone else did to you. And I'm presaging the next episode, because I think we're there. Forgive fearlessly.
Yeah.
And when we energize empathy, as opposed to getting lost in that echo chamber of sympathy, forgiveness, where there's sympathy and it's unhealthy, that's a tall order. But where we have energized empathy, we create a context where we can forgive and do it fearlessly.
I love that, Tom. Well, now I'm excited for our next episode.
Yay.
Thank you for the conversation, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.